Deals for struggling Michigan schools. Some local political races are getting pretty interesting. The debate over Trump's 100 days and a tour through Southwest Detroit. Stay put. My Week starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, Craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We're so happy that you're with us. A lot going on this week. We'll share some insight into some local political races that are getting pretty interesting, plus possible deals for struggling schools. We may not see school closures after all. We will also debate the impact of President Trump's first 100 days in office on Michigan, and we're going to give you a tour of Southwest Detroit from a little bit of a different perspective. That is all coming up for you on My Week. So let's get started. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News is here, along with Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Hey guys, how's your week going so far?
Oh, it's dandy.
Yeah, we were just looking at some pictures of the Q line, the old light rail going up and down Woodward.
M1.
The M1, excuse me, exactly. The M1. When do you think you're going to take a ride on that?
Well, I'm scheduled to take a ride on it on the day it opens, on the 12th.
Yeah.
When they're doing all the hoopla. So, looking forward to it.
That's right.
I will ride it every day.
Every single day?
I'm one of the maybe 1,000 people who will be able to use it as commuter service.
All right. Well, we're going to expect a report.
Except to come out here.
With the GoPro on the top of your head. We want to see how it goes. All right. A couple things that I want to get to, and I want to start talking about some political races. First off, starting with the mayor's race in the city of Detroit. It looks like with some filing deadlines that we're coming down to Mike Duggan and Coleman Young. And Nolan, let me start with you on how this is sort of setting up and what kind of narrative you think that we're going to be seeing coming out of this race.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be much of a race. Coleman Young, well, all he's really got is a name. I don't think that he offers anywhere near the political organization, the skills, the campaign skills, fundraising capabilities. He's got Adolph Mongo working for him, so it's going to be all about race. But I don't think that resonates in the city anymore. I think this is going to be a walk away for Duggan unless a more substantial candidate gets in.
But what about the hammering of his message of saying, the neighborhoods aren't getting a lot of attention? Mike Duggan's administration will push back and say all we've done in the last year and a half is really concentrate on services for the neighborhoods. Yeah. But where the sticking point would be measuring him on the population growth is one of the things that he said. This is what you're going to have to judge me on.
I said when he said that it wasn't a good idea to say, we'll have a growing population inside of 4 years. I mean, it wasn't realistic. He has slowed the exodus of people out of the city, I think, and got more people moving in. The problem that Duggan would face if there were a credible challenger is that for most people who live in the city, the rate of improvement in their lives has not been all that dramatic. I mean, if you live in a neighborhood outside of downtown and midtown or outside of the really stable middle-class neighborhoods, not much has changed in 4 years. I mean, the streetlights are on, the garbage gets picked up, but there isn't better opportunity. There's not better schools. Crime is still a real issue in all of those places, and I'm not saying that those are the mayor's fault. I mean, these are deep-seated problems that have really difficult solutions, and I think he's working really hard on them. But it would be a hard sell to the people who live in those neighborhoods to say, Mike Duggan has made things better for you. And I think somebody else who came along and said, who had a credible resume and record, could come along and say, I could do better. I think a lot of people would listen to that message.
So, I mean, the mayor obviously will say, look, more work needs to be done, and we acknowledge that. But Nolan, what would you recommend to him in saying how would you campaign moving forward, though?
Well, I mean, I would disagree somewhat with Steve in that I think people in the neighborhoods are finally seeing a positive direction. They're seeing some movement after years of going the other way. There's been, the response times are down. I mean,
a little better.
Crime is still a huge problem,
really
as you
bad,
said, and they're going to have to get a handle on the gangs. They don't want to talk about gang violence, but it's out there in the community, and they need to address it head on. But blight removal's going. You know, there's always, every day, a new announcement about this project. There is a sense of movement and momentum, and that at this point, I think that's
I mean, it's better than what we had.
Right.
But day to day, I think people's lives are not that much
What
improved.
could somebody else credibly
Well, see, I think
promise?
that's the mayor's reasonable pushback is how much faster could you even go given the amount of work that needs to be done, and again, the limited resources that we're still working with. I mean, City of Detroit still does not have the money it needs to really improve the worst problems that we have, and there's no prospect for us getting that money. But I do think somebody else could come along with a message that says, here's what I would do differently, and they would get, I think they would get a lot of people's attention and maybe their vote.
But so do you think that Coleman Young is that candidate?
I don't think Coleman Young is that candidate. I think he is much better now than he was 8 years ago when he first ran for Senate. And he ran for mayor too, didn't he?
I don't remember.
In 2009. I think the time he's had in the Senate has matured him somewhat. I've always liked him personally. I don't think he's the sort of caricature that a lot of people have ascribed to him anymore. But I don't think he's ready by a long shot to be mayor.
Now you're waiting for Tom Barrow, right?
Well, you never know.
I like Tom Barrow too, and I think sometime he used to be my neighbor when I was a kid. Someone like Tom Barrow though might have a better shot at Mike Duggan. I think Benny Napoleon, if he decided to run again, his message would resonate differently this time than it did 4 years ago, because again, in 4 years it wasn't reasonable to expect that everything was just going to be rosy for everybody living in.
All right.
Detroit.
So what can we expect this summer? Do you think, Nolan?
Well, hopefully it'll be a civil campaign that doesn't seek to divide the city. We don't need that. Again, you never know when Adolph's pulling the strings, whether it's going to be, you know, all bomb throwing all the time, and whether anybody's even going to pay attention. I think Coleman Young's going to have to get a lot more traction and a lot more weight behind him before people even pay attention.
And the race thing is going to be difficult to pull for a number of reasons that Duggan has taken advantage of. I mean, he had all of the surviving members of Coleman Young's administration, the mayor, Coleman Young's administration, come out and talk about why Duggan was the right choice for them, and why Coleman Young was nothing like the man they worked for. I think that does a lot to blunt the race sort of dynamic in that conversation.
You also have to look at the money that's being poured into campaigns as well, and the support that
it's not like
gets.
It's not like black people are not supporting Mike Duggan. I mean, everybody you hear coming out for Mike Duggan is an African American. That's who lives in the city. It will be hard to sort of pit this.
And look where we are in the city. You got a white mayor, and now you have a white school superintendent. If that gets done, I mean, that's not something 10 years ago you would have thought.
And you have African Americans making those choices, electing the mayor, electing the school board. The majority black school board who chooses a white superintendent.
Hey, I want to move on to Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley posting the countdown clock on a website this week, basically saying, hey, on May 30th, I'm going to make a big announcement. And he put this video up where he starts off initially talking about his daughter who has autism. And we all know kind of, I think, we've interacted with him a lot, the calm, kind of, you know, quieter presence that Brian Calley is, and he's touting that as a positive, saying, you know, I'm not the loudest voice in the room, but I'm a steady voice that gets things done. What did you make of that kind of soft rollout right now, Nolan, and the fact that it's like, stay tuned for May 3rd?
Well, I've heard him speak on the subject, and that is something that really resonates with audiences. His work on autism, his very personal connection to the disability community, and you know, he really gets people's attention when he talks about that. I think it's a smart approach because it sets him apart from everybody else who's out there talking about the standard point by point by point, education, infrastructure, taxes, blah, blah, blah. And it humanizes him coming out of an administration that has been knocked for its lack of compassion, and it really portrays him as a compassionate guy.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting tack because the other things that he also touted on the things was right to work and how he pushed for that, and also talking about business tax. What do you think that Brian Calley would have to do, though, Stephen, to separate himself from the administration that he is serving under right now, which could be a detriment if he ends up running for governor?
I think that's one of the detriments that he has. The other that he has is that he came out and late in the process pushed back against the Trump campaign, and I think understood that there would be some political ramifications inside the Republican Party for that. I think that still could hurt him next year, given that Bill Schuette was unequivocal in his support for the.
I think he's got a lot harder road in the primary than he would have
Calley
in a
does?
general election. He's sort of, I'd compare him to like Andy Dillon 8 years ago. He's got a lot harder task convincing the Republican base that he's their sugar daddy than he would standing in a general election, because in a general election he looks like a guy who could pick up support
like a more reasonable
across the aisle.
Yeah.
So what do you think will end up being the major issue in the governor's race for Michigan? I know it's really far down the road, but but hang on, but you have candidates who are formulating where they're going to be standing and what their tact is going to be. I know you don't like talking, but I want to make you talk about
20
it.
months away from that.
So?
I don't know. I don't know what the issue would be. I mean, I do think that for Republicans, they're tilting against 60 years of history in the state now, where we have never. A governor has not been succeeded by someone of his or her own party since, I think, the 40s or 50s. So, I mean, that's a lot to try to overcome. That gives Democrats an advantage. I think Democrats have to figure out which candidate has statewide appeal. I mean, Gretchen Whitmer and Dan Kildee are popular in the places where they run, but I don't know that most people even know them outside of those places. So.
And I don't think it's going to be talking points. I think there's a lot of external factors that will influence this campaign. Tell me where Donald Trump's going to be in 2018. Is he going to be posting some successes?
I don't know where we're going to be after the next week.
Are people going to be sort of
will people run with him or away from him?
Again, you can't sit here today and know that. And where's the economy going to be? Our household income's going to be still growing, or are we going to get some kind of economic surge out of these tax reforms, or is the economy going to collapse? There's too many variables for anybody to know. I'm with Steve on the history. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter who the personalities have been. We have always flipped back and forth each time. That's the sort of state Michigan is in statewide races. So, I really don't know. But I do agree that you got to run somebody who has a little broader appeal than what we've seen on the Democratic side at the moment.
Or those people have to build that appeal, right? And they have time. I mean, I think
they have time.
When Gretchen Whitmer announced, what was it, January 1st or whatever, I was really skeptical. But I mean, I think there's a sort of rhyme and reason to the slow, methodical build of her campaign that we're seeing in terms of the endorsements that she's been able to pick up. Maybe she builds that appeal over the next year. I don't know. All
right, before we talk about where Trump's going to be in another year or so, I want to point out what happened this week with the Michigan Department of Education. We've been talking about the possibility of school closures around the state, schools that are on the low performing list, and they have been there now for a number of years. Well, they've kind of figured out some deals. So the state superintendent has sat down with these districts and said, look, how can we figure out so you're not going to close? And I think that those are some positive steps that we're finally seeing. It's not just we're going to close it, we're going to shut it down because you're not doing well. It's here's now the help that we're going to be able to give you, or at least start to liaison and say this is what you're going to have to do to try to get a couple of bench points. Nolan, do you think that this was the right thing to do as opposed to, we're talking about just shut down, reconfigure?
I mean, how many times have we tried to fix these schools? There are schools that are just chronically failing. Some of these schools have 50% absentee rate. You're not going to fix these schools unless you have a tremendous amount resource and change to push through. You're certainly not going to fix them with the current administration, faculty, whatever. They've got to be completely turned upside down and remade. And you know, we keep talking about accountability for schools, accountability for schools. These are not only just some of the worst schools in the state, they're some of the worst schools in the nation, and they get another year to continue to fail children.
So when you say it needs more resources and something totally different, what are you talking about? So you would advocate for just shutting these schools down entirely, taking the staff, putting them someplace else?
Some, or getting rid of the staff. Some I would completely restructure, maybe charter them out to an operator with some real experience in, well, you can roll your eyes.
No, I didn't roll my eyes. No, but I didn't roll my eyes.
There are a lot of places outside Detroit that have been able to bring in some really good charter operators. We haven't
I think that's the asterisk, making sure that you have an experienced charter operator and that you have those ones that have had success.
And by the way, we've had some very successful ones in the city of Detroit too. Yes. You can sit here and pretend you can maintain the status quo and throw a few more dollars here or there and not change anything, and you're going to get better results. These kids need something we're not giving them.
They do need something we're not giving them.
I agree with that.
They do need something we're not giving them, but so do the teachers there, so do the principals there. These are communities that are under stress, and that's why the schools look the way they do. We put a lot on the schools to try to ameliorate that. I suppose that makes some sense, and that's the way we assume that things should work. But we do need more resources. We need rethinking in those schools in terms of what are the things that schools need to provide for kids who come from these kinds of environments. And I'll be honest with you, there's not a charter school in the nation that's figured that stuff out, not one. And so...
Oh, there's a number working in urban areas that have.
That's absolutely untrue.
It certainly is
Name
not.
one.
Well,
name one.
Look at the KIPP schools.
KIPP schools are really decent examples,
but some really good successes.
But the people who manage KIPP will tell you that they have not figured out the formula for dealing with this on the level that we have here.
Maybe we have to start at the beginning and take a look and say, is the model we're using working? Is lining kids up in a classroom 30 at a time in front of a teacher work for kids who come from this sort of underprivileged background?
I mean, I guess what we're not...
And we haven't had the political will to innovate.
Yeah, I guess what we're not doing is we're not thinking about,
No, go ahead.
We're just not thinking about it in terms of who these kids are and where they come from. We're thinking about it in terms of the schools and the districts and what they want to do or how they want to do it.
Or what they have not done.
I agree with that, and I don't think you can take these kids who have come from some really harsh backgrounds and live in harsh places and say, we're going to test you the same way we do kids in Birmingham and Grosse Pointe, and you need to hit those same results. I think John Engler had a good plan, I thought, and was pushing it that let's focus on reading as long as it takes to get every kid to the reading level and then go from there. Not worry about testing anything else. Let's get the basics right first, no matter how long it takes.
I agree that focusing on literacy is a huge, huge issue. All right, so we only have a couple of minutes to talk about Trump's first 100 days. And what a... it's been 100 days. And I just specifically wanted to look at the impact that some of his executive orders and I guess pushes have been on Michigan. So we look, and what have we seen? Just give me your assessment there, Nolan.
Well,
100 days of Trump.
We don't know the impact yet. It's all too soon. I think it's as ridiculous to try and judge a presidency on the first 100 days as it is for a president, as he did, to make all sorts of wild promises.
So should we take that 100 days kind of off the table?
No,
I think the importance of these, he had some successes. He's had some failures. I think it was foolish to try to rush through a remake of Obamacare. It's too big a job. That's a job that ought to take a year and a half or longer. But you look at this guy came in with not a great deal of support in terms of his approval ratings. More than half of the people in the country didn't support him. You have in Congress Democrats who are not going to give him a single vote on anything, and Republicans who can't decide what they want. And so you're not going to get big measures passed through Congress right away in that environment. He's going to have to change that relationship. He did get a Supreme Court justice through. That's a huge deal. He did send a pretty solid message with his Syria strike that when America says, we're not going to tolerate something, we're not going to tolerate something. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the things he didn't get done, we ought to be glad he didn't get done.
I think you got to look at these things historically, and if you talk to historians who study the presidency, they will talk about the unprecedented, chaotic nature of this presidency in its first 100 days. It has not found its footing. It's not found its sort of mode of governance or leadership. And I don't think, I mean, I'm not rooting for this to fail. I mean, I think we all need him to succeed. And I will say something that may surprise people. I think in the last week or so, we've seen a more nuanced and mature approach to some of the things that he wants to do, but then he puts out this tax plan as like a you know, refrigerator.
But if you look at the last week, I mean, there's some evidence there that he is learning on the job. You know, he's backed off the wall. Changed his tone on North Korea, changed his tone on NAFTA. There's some evidence that the people around him are starting to influence him, and that's the most important thing for a new president, particularly one who comes out in with completely no experience in politics.
We're going to also have to look at impact if they come back around on immigration, and also for Michigan, Great Lakes.
Impact in Michigan, immigration, disaster in Southwest Detroit.
It's huge. And we're going to talk about that, you know, in a second. You know, finally tonight, a unique look at Southwest Detroit. Stephen was just talking about. Detroit is known for its different neighborhoods. They face their own set of challenges. Well, Southwest Detroit is known for its culture and its diversity. And as part of our One Detroit coverage, here's a tour of Southwest neighborhoods from a little bit of a different perspective. Take a look.
Driving down Bagley, which this is what's remaining of a commercial strip that existed all the way from what at that time was downtown Times Square. It went all the way down Bagley, all the way to almost Grand Boulevard. This is what's left of that economic strip that was the heyday in the 50s, early 60s, all the way to almost Grand Boulevard. Two expressways kind of broke it up. John C. Lodge, and later on in the mid-60s, the Jeffries. You see that tunnel right there? Right there. That's a train tunnel to Canada. I used to see undocumented white folks come across from Canada from there. Yeah, when I was a little kid. This is the oldest neighborhood in the city of Detroit. It's real interesting. Corktown is a neighborhood that real estate prices are jumping off the hook. A lot of professionals and even more than professional, well-to-do individuals live here. There's fancy restaurants like Mudgee's and all of that. But when I was growing up, it was definitely a very poor neighborhood. I used to play handball against this building right here. It was a glove factory. You can see in the corner over there, Michigan and Trumbull. Left side is what's left of the old Tiger Stadium.
One of the things that's really interesting that a lot of people don't know is that Southwest, as we know it, got its start from Corktown.
Now we're getting close to Grand Boulevard, and for many people, this is kind of the start of the broader definition of Southwest Detroit. On the left-hand side is where the Cadillac plant held reign and was king for a long time. There were three plants that during the heyday of the automobile industry anchored Southwest Detroit. It was Fleetwood, Fisher, and Cadillac. We're driving through what's increasingly becoming a Yemeni community. Folks from Yemen, part of the Arab American world, have settled in this neighborhood and also Southeast Dearborn.
The store we just passed is an Arab and Mexican store. You're not going to see that in a lot of places.
No.
Arab Mexican store.
Passing through that overpass, we're essentially in an African American community. Schaefer, a lot of folks would have called this the original Southwest Detroit back in the day. The old name for the neighborhood used to be Visca Road. This was the home to a very well-established, stabled, working class and middle class African American community. Werner on the weekends, well, any time of the week is a hopping place. Certain times of the day, certain parts of Werner, it's faster to walk from one block to another.
So Werner is our Woodward.
And a little bit more crowded. And murals are a very important part of the cultural fabric. Southwest Detroit, they got a variety of food. You got Dominican, Puerto Rican, Mexican,
Honduran.
I mean, it's just, the list goes on.
Here we are at Clark Park.
It's kind of a spiritual center for the community. This park was actually closed by the city early 1990s. And a group of community activists formed the Clark Park Coalition. And over the years made sure that it was well maintained. Became a star within the Detroit Parks and Rec system.
And this story was a part of a special American Black Journal hosted by Stephen on Wednesday night in Detroit. A really interesting show that you guys ended up putting
Fascinating
together.
part of the city. I mean, it's one of the most culturally rich parts of the city, but it's also, for me, I feel like, you know, you walk down there at 3 p.m. down Verner or down Michigan, it feels more like a city than the rest of Detroit. And there's so many things I feel like we could learn in other neighborhoods about density, business activity, and those things. So.
All right, very cool. Well, if you want to see more of that, you can just go to our website at myweek.org. And that's going to do it for My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. We are back next Thursday. If you need your My Week fix, you know, you can always find us myweek.org and on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding is also provided by Delta.